Much, Agueda, and welcome everyone. My name is Anita McGahan from the Burns Center for Social Change at Northeastern University, and welcome to this workshop series on innovating in the public interest. It's really about innovating in government and government services. And the subtitle today is Partnering for the Public Good. Partnerships occur everywhere, and we'll talk a little bit about exactly how. This is really about innovating through partnerships to advance the public good. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we get going. This is, as Agueda mentioned, the first of 6 workshops here. We want to be very specific and actionable. I want to offer you research-based insights about what works. So everything we do is going to be based on that rigorous research that's been conducted, that's profiled at our website, pi2.burnscenter.org. Here, the goal is to support you in making lasting change that improves lives. So we want to make change as quickly, as effectively as possible. We want to do it in a way that's going to work, that is lasting and has a lasting impact. And we want to improve lives. So that's the goal for this workshop series. As Agueda mentioned, you will receive a workshop certificate if you attend at least 4 of our 6 sessions. And you'll also receive a workshop certificate for each session. So if we want to support you here. This workshop series will be followed by project workshops. So if you're working on an innovation project, we want to support you. We want to know about that. So please tell us in the chat if you're working on something and whether you'd like us to reach out to you about how to support you. Okay, today's agenda is to introduce the whole workshop series of 6 sessions. So to introduce the workshop series as a whole, the goal is to be smart, strategic, focused, effective, to be an internal entrepreneur from your role, within your role in government. And I also want to talk about the specific agenda of getting started on a project. So if you have an ambition to improve people's lives through lasting change, how do you even get started? That's going to be our topic for today. I wanted to start off by offering you a few examples on how you can be effective. And these are the kinds of examples of projects that we'll be talking about through all 6 sessions. The first example on the upper left-hand side is from IBM. IBM changed its hiring criteria a few years ago away from requiring college degrees for entry-level jobs over to skills-based hiring. So if you could show you had certain skills, even if you didn't have a degree, you could get a job at IBM. And that ended up being phenomenally successful. They ended up filling jobs with people who performed incredibly well, who did not quit the job, who were retained in their roles, and it was enormously successful. Here's another example on the upper right here from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa, Oklahoma implemented a program to rebuild its downtown core by attracting remote workers that had jobs in other places. So if you had a job in Massachusetts or New York or California, or even in Europe or Canada or Asia, you could relocate to Tulsa, Oklahoma. They would pay you $10,000, get you started with a great apartment, either to buy or rent, set you up in a community, provide you with remote workspace, and bring you into the community. And that turned out to be tremendously successful. And we'll be using that as another case study as we unfold our curriculum. The third at the lower left, Georgia Works, has taken 850 chronically homeless men off the streets in Atlanta. There are something like 5,000 homeless men in Atlanta at the time it got started in 2018. And it took the 850 of them out of the justice system and into housing as jobs. And we'll talk a little bit about how Georgia Works accomplished that. And then finally, another case study that we'll be doing through the course of the program on the bottom right is here in Toronto is called the Oaks Revitalization Project. And they have trained 90 former hardcore inner city gang members for well-paying construction jobs. And we'll be talking about how they accomplished that as well. So a theme that will that will rise through our case examples relates to employment, reshaping employment. But it's not the only theme. We'll also be thinking about examples from childcare and education. The Binti Project, which is profiled on Pi Squared by our colleague Kate Cummings, is an NGO. It's a non-governmental organization that matches children that are in government systems for social welfare with caregivers, with adopting parents. So we'll talk a little bit about how they work together. We have a case study on the upper right on Giddy Mobile. This is an online gaming platform that appeals to high school students, particularly in Nigeria and throughout Africa. And it gets them eventually skills in financial acumen. It gets them bank accounts. It's profiled also on Pi Squared by Tunji Adebasan, who is the founder of it, and it's been incredibly successful. Hundreds of thousands of high school students now playing video games on Giddy Mobile as part of their high school education program. And then on the bottom left, we'll be talking about programs that put these pioneering educators together together with students in after-school programs, and how they have changed the way that early education occurs, mostly in Central America, and again, profiled by our friend Samina Karim on Pi Squared. So lots of examples that we'll be turning to on how to do successful projects. There are also some examples on revitalization through entrepreneurship and business development. We have examples from the Build From Within Alliance, which has revitalized the core of industrial cities like Minneapolis and Detroit, from the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, where high potential adults that are on public assistance have been trained to open businesses in Rio's favelas, an incredibly successful program called Banco de Providencia. We've got a program on the lower left on supporting low-income women who work in retail with basic education, and I'll talk a little bit about that as the course progresses. And then on the fourth and final example from this slide on the right-hand side, we'll talk about how New York City sewers were unclogged through an initiative to work with grease recyclers to prevent grease dumping in sewers by fast food restaurants. So these are the kinds of examples of innovation projects that we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about providing new services. We want to support you in streamlining processes, creating evidence on what's possible to build capabilities and restructure. I also want to profile what this series is not about. And to illustrate this, I want to, point to some of what our research is showing leads to problems. And one of them is, endless analysis where you're sent back to the drawing board time after time to try to come up with more evidence that what you're doing is going to work. And you just get bogged down and you can't make progress. Another problem is media-first political headlines. This is, people come out and announce initiatives that never really come to fruition, and they're celebrated in the newspaper or on videos or on YouTube or on, any social media platform, and then they lose steam. They never really take off. We don't want you taking unnecessary risks with your resources and career. We want to show you some evidence-based strategies for getting going that will help you avoid that and instead become a hero, and we'll talk about that. We want to avoid opening the door to well-intentioned companies that really don't have a clue what they're doing or how to help, or they don't have a strong history of doing the work. They show up, they're well-intentioned, but we don't have any confidence that they will actually be able to deliver, and so we'll talk about that. And we don't want to chase tech, we don't want to chase uninformed ideas that push technology into specific environments where it can't be effective. And there's a famous example of that I want to bring to your attention, and we'll return to it through the course. It'll become a touchstone for us on how this can go bad, and it's called Play Pump. So this is a picture of the play pump. I hope you can see the picture of the merry-go-round with some young people playing on it in the lower right-hand corner. The project was developed around 2005 or so, and the idea was that these merry-go-rounds could be installed to pump water through children's play on a merry-go-round into a storage container, which is at the upper left-hand side of this photo. The water would be stored and made available to the community on demand through a pumping system. That was the idea. So the merry-go-round would fire a pump that would then push the water up into a storage tank and store it for future use. Here's a schematic of the play pump mechanism here. The idea was that there would be children playing on a merry-go-round, point number one, that would drive water, point number two, from groundwater, point number three, up into this cistern. It would be held there. And then on the right-hand side, when people needed it, they would turn a spigot and that water would be deployed. Okay, this was well-intentioned. It was designed in North America. It was caught the attention of well-meaning advocates that were swept up in the 2005, wake of U2 and Bono and other celebrities publicizing poverty in sub-Saharan Africa and demanding change here, and it was an utter failure. There's been a number of postmortems on why the play pump was a failure, and here's just a short list of some of them. The communities weren't involved in the design of the project and didn't buy into it. It turns out that in these communities, children really don't play on merry-go-rounds in these cultures. They're often at school. If they're not at school, they're often working at home. The merry-go-rounds are hard to turn. In fact, it turned out that these merry-go-rounds would lose their flexibility, would lose their internal their internal mechanisms would get bogged down by sand and grit, and it became very, very difficult for them to turn. So it would take very large numbers of very large children to actually have the energy to turn the merry-go-rounds over time. Water gathering routines, it turns out, which are often at rivers in nearby streams, they're culturally significant. People go to gather water at these rivers and streams at times that are culturally important, and communication and exchange occurs as water is gathered. And that wasn't accounted for in the design of this. Perhaps even more importantly and somewhat shockingly, there really isn't enough high-quality groundwater in the first place. There's not enough of it. There's insufficient and unreliable groundwater. There's not enough spare parts for the whole mechanism. When these things did go in, they were immediately taken over by bullies and ruffians and people who wanted to control this scarce resource. They redirected pathways in the communities in ways that were dangerous. It was hard to get there. And there was a lot of photo opping by celebrities that really turned off communities. This is the classic profile of a failed project that's pursued through collaborations with well-intentioned but uninformed private sector advocates that get swept up in a kind of emotional passion to try to help. It's all well-intentioned, but these tech push strategies really have been shown very rigorously to be a problem. So part of the purpose of our work is to try to help you not get, absorbed into these problematic situations. And to do that, we want to rely on rigorous scholarship, as I've said. And, we're relying on scholarly studies and a lot of work that's been done over the last several decades on corporate social responsibility, on ESG investing, on what's gone wrong, what's gone right, global health and development. We've done work on innovation in government, where that pays off. And all of this background research is available to you on the Pi-Squared website at pisquared.burnscenter.org. That material is organized and sorted there, and so you can click through to it. It includes research studies, research papers, but also video interviews. We also have a podcast at Pi-Squared. You can get the link at pisquared.burnscenter.org, but we're podcasting at Private Innovation in the Public Interest, which is available on all the major platforms. So we're going to be drawing on educational leadership and scholarship as we make these recommendations. Right. So the research shows that there's a number of myths. And as I kick off this 6-part series, I want to bring them to your attention because they're incredibly important. The first myth is that the public good is well identified primarily by government. It turns out that's not true. The government is a number of agencies and processes and departments and so on, many of which have been structured in pursuit of the public good. But these are primarily only organizational forms. They're sort of set up based on historical, vetted, kind of shaken out ways of doing things that that reflect kind of historical trade-offs and the history of the way the organization has developed. Of course, many of the people, most of the people in government, in these jobs and jobs that are supported by these systems, are incredibly insightful and incredible advocates of the public good. But there's really no guarantee that the primary or only place to understand the public good is in government. There's also a lot of people in non-governmental organizations, nonprofits that have great ideas, hospitals, schools, universities, even in companies that have good ideas about what the public good could be. And one of the positions that I'm going to take in this course is that we each have responsibility and insight about what the public good is. All of us, everyone. And the real challenge is figuring out how to use organizations, including governmental agencies, to actually deliver. So that'll be the theme we come back to. A second myth is that companies have tons of money and capacity to help. The truth is that even in their core businesses, the half-life of companies is something like 6 years. You know, companies often fail. They often are resource constrained, and they often have inspired advocates for change, but not the depth of capacity that we would want them to have to help. Another myth is that the bad media attention will curb bad behavior. It turns out that maybe it will, maybe it won't. We can't count on the media to curb bad behavior. Another myth is that new technology is easy to implement. It turns out that the barriers to tech implementation tend to be cultural and organizational. They tend not to be the technology itself. The tech itself tends to be more accessible than the mechanisms for its implementation. And we'll talk a lot about that in this workshop series. Another myth is that good ideas will carry the day. You know, it turns out that good ideas are actually relatively abundant. What's difficult is implementing them and putting them into work. And that's what we're about at Pi Squared and what we hope to focus on here. There are also some underappreciated truths that we will return to throughout this series. And here's a short list, and I'll go through this quickly. The first is that public servants see countless innovation opportunities. There are many of you that know a lot about what to do. And that is full stop. Many people that are working in government every day see ways to make the systems that they're dealing with better and more effective. A second is that many people in the private sector want to help, but they don't understand how government works. I was talking with Kate Cummings on Pi Squared about how many people in my MBA classrooms over the years are simply clueless about how government works and about how change happens. In fact, on Pi Squared, I also talked with a leading thought leader in the corporate sector named Roger Martin about this as well. It's surprising how little public sector understanding of the public sector permeates corporate life. A third is that an underappreciated truth is that really that the private sector, the public sector operate independently. They're both essential. Neither of them operates without the other. The interaction between the public and private sector happens constantly through purchasing, through regulation, through where you get your software, The manufacturer of the desk that you're working on right now was probably, or the chair that you're sitting in was probably in the private sector, even though you're a public sector employee. There's a billion ways that the private sector and the public sector interact, and working together is critical for making progress. And here's a critical reason why. Governments tend to be strong on scaling and accountability, but not on experimentation. It's super hard to experiment with new ideas in the public sector simply because of the mandate for scale and accountability and for treating everybody the same. On the other hand, companies tend to be good at experimentation and learning and pivoting, but they're not very good at persistence and reliability. They tend to frequently fail and frequently change. And so what we're going to be about in this workshop is leveraging the strengths and protecting against the downsides of working across sectoral boundaries here. Another unappreciated truth is that companies are resource constrained. They don't have endless money, as I said, but they also don't have endless resources of other types that may be important. Sometimes they try to foist off their excess stuff, like their overbuilt widgets or their old outdated technologies on the public sector, and that's almost never a good idea here. And then finally, another underappreciated truth is that the public good is ours to own. As I said, we each have equal claim and responsibility for the public good. And we can't get rid of that. We all have that as citizens, no matter where we work, in the public sector, the private sector, and that's going to be a theme throughout this workshop. So here are our topics for the next few weeks, a roadmap for you. I'm going to try to provide you with very specific steps that you can pursue to get started on a project, and I absolutely hope you will, and that you'll tell me what your project is and allow us to support you and be thought partners with you as you get going. On April 9th, you're all invited to come back. We're going to talk about early wins, and then we'll move on to getting organized to get going. And we'll move on May 1st to thinking about how to learn and pivot and change and adjust. It will be toward the end of our workshop series that we start to think about growing and scaling. So we're going to put off getting big until we know what we're doing. That's the major theme here. And then starting in September, we're going to be doing some in-person workshops for teams of innovators. I'll say more about this later, but you are invited to join us for these workshops. We'll talk about that as the course ends. So let me get into the 5 steps on getting started here. Here's number 1. The first step is to build your team here. And the starting point for this is to ask the question, based on what you deal with every day, your scope of experience, your day-to-day activity, where do you see low-hanging fruit for innovation? Whenever we see effective teams, it's always groups of friends that have this shared insight that together that they can do something better. They can be more effective at what's on their desk, what's in their day-to-day roles. They can be more effective if they just change something that they have access to change, or at least hope for access to change. So what do you see on your desk right now that could be done better? I'm going to ask you to avoid in your team thinking about ideas that are pushed at you by somebody. You know, I want you to tell me what you can do right now to make people's lives better here. What do you think should be made better? And your teammates become people that share that belief. They're ideally from within your organization, but they also may be from outside your organization. They should have relevant skills, insights, experiences, but they could even be your neighbors or your friends or your family. And let me give you an example of this. This is a picture from a project that we were just involved with and of paper medical records. So this is a picture that comes from an HIV clinic in the country of Malawi in South Africa. It is the medical files, the medical records. Each one of these folders is a medical record for an HIV patient at a clinic in Malawi. It turns out all HIV clinics in Malawi have had paper medical records at the time this picture was taken. This picture was taken in about 2006. There were a group of friends that worked at a clinic near Lilongwe in Malawi that said these should be moved online. They should be automated. They should be made electronic, these medical records. And they were successful. Here's a picture, the same picture on the left-hand side of those paper records. On the right-hand side is a picture of a terminal and a administrator working with an electronic medical record. The electronic medical record system that you're seeing on the right-hand side here was implemented in every clinic that we studied between 2007 and 2019. It's still not all clinics in Malawi. It's about 125 out of something like 300 something HIV clinics. It took 22 years to roll this out. And the question I want to bring to the forefront of your thinking is, why was such a simple idea so hard to implement? Well, the answer is a lot of these clinics didn't have reliable electricity. So that had to be addressed. Many of these systems are being run off lithium-ion batteries that were brought into the clinics, and solar panels were put in to recharge those batteries. The internet wasn't widely available, so towers were built and internet connectivity was enabled. There were training programs that had to occur, and all of this was done by a team of committed and motivated workers like this woman on the right that wanted to make change and improve lives. And you might ask me, was it worth it? Did they improve lives? The answer to that question is absolutely. HIV deaths at the clinics dropped 28% as a direct result of this system, as electronic medical records enabled follow-up care and continuity of care and shortened waiting times and made it easier for clinic staff to follow up with patients who were very sick here. So was it worth it? A 28% reduction in deaths within 5 years of implementation, in my opinion, is an extraordinary achievement. And that is the kind of impact that we're looking for here. You may be interested to know as well that children benefited the most. And we learned something really interesting as well, which is people who were afraid of the system and afraid of HIV care and who did not provide consent on privacy were the ones that benefited the most, that were most likely to have their lives saved by the system. So we learned something too, which is that trust in the system was not as abundant as you would have wanted. We learned that people who didn't trust the system, maybe because follow-up care was not provided, were the ones who most needed the system. So able to really, kind of demonstrate to health leadership in Malawi the importance of modernization of these systems. So step one, here's a kind of series of questions that I want to encourage you to think about as you build your team. Within your day-to-day activity, where do you see the low-hanging fruit for innovation? Who else cares about what you see as possible? Who do you trust? Who do you want to work with on the 3 times rule? The 3 times rule is the idea that every project takes 3 times longer than you think it's going to take. Even when you plan for something to take 3 times longer, it takes 3 times longer. So you're going to have to work with people for a pretty long time. Who do you want to work with for 3 times longer than you think you're going to need to get something implemented? It's great if you can find somebody to help with private sector experience. And the reason why is private sector colleagues, people from companies, tend to be really good at experimenting and developing data and pivoting and showing what's possible. So if you can find a neighbor, a friend, a colleague who can help you reach into a company for experimentation, that can be very helpful. In Malawi, there were a lot of partners from private companies that provided the tech, that provided expertise, that provided the lithium-ion batteries, that helped construct the cell towers and the internet connectivity. Those people were great at experimenting and pivoting and learning and experimenting in ways that government is typically not as experienced with. And that kind of capability turns out to be very, very helpful. And that's a rigorously researched finding that I'm conveying to you when I say that. We also want to tie what you're doing eventually to the strategic priorities for your group or agency. I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes when we get to steps 4 and 5. But once you start to have some success, it's useful to be able to explain what you're doing in ways that tie to your mandate as a government agency. And we'll come back to that as we talk about that, as we get into steps 4 and 5. Okay, that's step 1. Find your team, create your team, and you want to really focus on things that are important right now that you see as low-hanging fruit. The second step, narrow your focus. You want to think about something very specific that you want to implement or change, okay? And be very exact about that and pinpoint something that really matters to the people that you seek to serve in your agency or your department. This picture here is a picture of a bridge on a highway access road in downtown Atlanta, Georgia, here in the United States. Here. And Georgia Works, which was founded in 2013 by a retired investment banker from Atlanta, he used to drive on this patch of highway access here and have the feeling that his neighbors, these people that are living under this highway underpass, they deserve better than to have to camp out on this highway underpass. He felt that there before the grace of God went him, he could have ended up in this highway underpass, but he had more opportunity than and more good luck than people who were camping here had. And he founded Georgia Works with the specific goal of trying to make it to create more options, particularly for homeless men that were living under this underpass, better options for them than choosing to live in this place. That was his goal. He wanted a sort of self-clearing out of this underpass. He wanted a homeless man not to have to choose to be in this underpass as opposed to better choices that he wanted to provide to them. Now, some years later, the successes of Georgia Works have been profound. Even back in 2021 or so, we had evidence of some of the successes, and here's a chart that describes them. On the left-hand side here, 100% of the clients had a permanent full-time job. 100% of people that went through a 6-month to a year-long Georgia Works program had a permanent full-time job when they graduated. Lower left here, 75% of them made it through to graduation. This is a program that has a zero tolerance policy for drug and alcohol addiction, and that's really hard. 75% of the clients make it, 25% don't. Next column, 90% of all graduates were active in the lives of their minor children. Turns out a lot of these men had unresolved challenges in caring for their children that needed to be addressed, and the Georgia Works program helped them with that. 100% of these clients had a bank account by the time they left the program. Next column, more than 95% avoided criminal recidivism. Many of these men, all of the men that were eligible for Georgia Works were nonviolent here, but almost all of them had some sort of criminal record for vagrancy, homelessness, shoplifting, other kinds of crimes like that. And many of them had been incarcerated, particularly in the city jail. The 95% of men that graduate from Georgia Works are not in the justice system anymore. 80% are still employed, living independently and contributing to society. More than 75% have driver's licenses, and 100% have access to come back into the program for support. But one thing that the founders of Georgia Works noticed is that 75% of driver's licenses seemed funny. It seemed problematic here. It turns out that in the state of Georgia, there was a law that said that you automatically had your driver's license suspended if you didn't show up for traffic court. Okay. And it turns out it's very common for especially low-income people to miss traffic court. Lateness is very common, especially among low-income people who don't have driver's licenses because they have to rely on public transportation to get even to traffic court. And the bus system in Atlanta is often running late. Childcare problems, sick children, car breakdowns, work demands, all of these are reasons that people were missing their traffic court appearances, and their driver's licenses were automatically suspended as a result of that. No license means you can't drive a landscaping truck, you can't drive a sanitation truck, you have to rely on these crummy buses in order to be able to get to a job. The insight that emerged out of Georgia Works was if we could lift or change this rule, then we could get a lot more people into employment and keep them off the streets. So the leaders of Georgia Works worked together with the Georgia Justice Project, which is a group of legal specialists. And in 2022, this rule was changed. They pinpointed this one law, this one rule, as an opportunity for making a big impact on reducing homelessness in Atlanta, and had that law changed. And now many, many more men that graduate from Georgia Works are able to retain jobs in landscaping and sanitation driving and so on as a result of that effort. So narrow your focus. What is a high leverage point for changing the system? No play pumps, no big sweeping media driven, celebrity driven initiatives. Let's figure out something very specific that you can do that will really help people here. Okay. What assumptions have to be addressed to prevent implementation? It turns out in Atlanta, the assumption was that most homeless men, were mentally ill or had other chronic problems that would prevent them from working. That is not true. Many of these men really just lost their capacity, had bad habits, sure, but lost their capacity to have access to systems. The assumptions in Malawi were that because there's no electricity, we can't have electronic medical records. Well, that problem could be solved here. So what assumptions have prevented implementation? And then what information can you generate about those assumptions that challenges them? What do you think has changed since systems were initially developed, or that law went into effect in Georgia, or the clinics were initially set up in Malawi? What can be changed now that maybe couldn't have been changed then here? And how can you show that that's possible? What evidence would you like to have to show that in HIV clinics in Malawi, or with 10 homeless Atlanta men, change could occur? Okay. And then, can you identify something very specific that would matter a lot to improving lives? One highway underpass in Atlanta, if that can be cleared out because the men who used to live there choose to do something different, that would be that's your linchpin. That's your way in to trying to show the change makers in your environment, the people that can make decisions that'll matter about the way the systems are organized, that change is taking place. Okay, I'm talking a lot. I'm looking forward to the Q&A in just a few minutes. So please start to enter your questions into the chat so Agueda can keep us real as we wind down. Let me keep going here. Step 3 is to bust some myths. Before you commit to a project, before you decide what you're going to do, think about what evidence you're going to need to refute an objection to change that you've heard a million times here. We want to make sure that the thing you want to do is actually going to have a big impact, and that you're going to be able to overcome objections. Okay, so let me give you an example here of another project that we're going to be focusing on as another case study that's going to come up again and again in our workshops. And this is about a company called Natura that went into the Amazon rainforest and worked with local communities to prevent deforestation. So on the right-hand side here, you can see a picture of these three wonderful young people here. On the right-hand side here is a fellow called Leo Ponjalupe. He's on pi2.burncenter.org. He was a doctoral student who grew up in the Amazon rainforest, who studied with us here in Toronto and did his dissertation in part on the Amazon rainforest. The person on the right here in the white t-shirt is a community leader from an indigenous community in the rainforest. And the fellow in the middle, he's also from the Amazon, and he works at Natura. He's from an indigenous community in the Amazon, but he works at Natura, this company that I just mentioned here. Natura is a private company, and it makes cosmetics. It makes lotions. In fact, Leo gave me this bottle of Ecos lotion that's made from Brazil nuts from the Amazon. There's a picture of it here at the bottom here. The myth that Natura shattered is that companies are killing the Amazon. That development of the Amazon through clear cutting and fire deforestation is inevitable. That's the myth. That communities are going to do that, communities such as the one led by the fellow on the left here, that communities are going to set fire to the trees or cut them down and sell them for lumber, and then start soy or corn or cattle farming because they need money. That's the myth. Natura went in and cut some deals with community leaders, and it took a lot of work. And this fellow in the middle here works for Natura, did this work. That went to these communities and said, we're going to present you with an opportunity to sell your nuts and fruits to Natura. Those nuts are going to be made into these very, very expensive lotions that are going to be sold to people like me living in places like Boston or Toronto. We're going to give you a 3-year contract, and don't cut down your Brazil nut trees. Instead, we'll give you a steady source of income for gathering the nuts here. Now, what kind of effect did that have? Leo used geomapping and satellite photographs to show the impact of Natura in the Amazon. This is a little bit hard to read, but the top 2 pictures show a map of the Amazon rainforest in the year 2000. And on the left-hand side, we've got forested proportions. This is carbon assessments that are made through satellite photography. On the right are fire incidents, and that's in the year 2000. And in the bottom, the same maps for 2018 after Natura's program was rolled out. Forested proportion in 2018, you can see it's gone down. The rainforest loss is approximately the size of the state of California over this period, this 18-year period. And fire incidents are very easy to see on the right-hand side compared to the earlier year, 2000, many, many more fire incidents as clear cutting occurs. It turns out Natura, in an analysis that Leo did using this data, preserved an area approximately the size of the state of New Jersey during a period of loss of approximately the size of California. And you may say to me, New Jersey's not as big as California, and that's true. But it is still a remarkably large preservation effort that Natura, as a privately owned company, accomplished when the governments in these communities could not accomplish that on their own. So through working with the local communities, a private company led to rainforest preservation at a scale that was really profoundly important. So the question here that I want you to think about under step 3 is, what's the evidence you can develop to refute an objection to change? Can you go deeper than the resistance that you're afraid of facing here? Don't assume the worst of people. Assume that if you can show them what's possible, that they'll get on board. And what can you show? What are the stories of the people that have been that are being affected? How does the system structure reflect old constraints, like the way that licenses and permits were dispersed in Atlanta, Georgia, 25 years ago? What's possible now that wasn't possible then. Here, how much does change matter to the people whose stories you're telling? You know, this young guy in the Amazon rainforest that works for Notori, he cares about the biomass, sure, but he also cares about preserving his heritage culture and the traditions and the way of life and the beauty and community of the Amazon rainforest. How can that be cultivated here? Okay, step 4, we want to tie the agenda for change to a redefined public good that's important in your agency. Let me talk a little bit about this example from New York City, which is my hometown. Uh, this is a schematic diagram of the way a fast food restaurant is supposed to dispose of its grease. So we have a car that's pulled up into a fast food restaurant on the upper left-hand side. There's oily wastewater on the right-hand side that's generated through the cooking. It's dumped through some sort of a system into a pipe that is supposed to go into what's called a grease interceptor that's depicted on the lower left-hand side. That's supposed to collect the grease and prevent it from going into the sewer system. Well, guess what? Nobody has working grease interceptors, it seems, in New York City. By 2013, 50% of sewer clogs in New York City were tied to illegal restaurant grease dumping. The fine for this was $10,000 per day, but it was rarely enforced. Okay. The new reality is that this fellow named Michael Flowers realized after doing some analysis was that the grease could actually be recycled. So if you fast forward from the original design of the system around grease interceptors to today, you get technological innovations in grease recycling here. So instead of enforcing a $10,000 per person per day violation, Michael Flowers, who was an employee of New York City and worked in a special office, which was called a strategic office for the mayor or something like that, said instead of enforcing these fines, let's use some databases, merge the databases to identify high target restaurants, and let's go offer to pick up their grease for them and give them to a commercial recycler that can recycle them for profit. Well, in classic New York City fashion, this was so successful that the restaurants eventually wanted to be paid for their grease, which I love. I love that idea. And there was competition to try to pick it up. And now grease is picked up by for-profit recyclers, and the problem is way down. And that idea of tying the solution to the problem to a redefinition of the public good around recycling this grease instead of fining people for throwing it in the sewer is what I want to bring to your attention. And I've got in the slide some articles on how that happened. Final step, step 5, redefine the public good, entire agenda to that redefined public good. So, you know, no more play pumps here. We want to define the public good in terms of the people that you are seeking to serve here. We'll talk about this in some detail in a case study where we called Tulsa Remote. So we're going to think about creating successes for your partners here as a critical component for change. So we want a lot of people to be heroes as a result of your idea. We want to think about how to redefine the public good in a way that that makes a lot of people to want to jump onto the project. So in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the city had been profoundly affected by a terrible race riot and downtown fire in the year 1921. So that's 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. This fire is sometimes called the Tulsa Race Massacre. It occurred between May 31st and June 1st of 1921 when mobs of terrorists really went into a Greenwood district of downtown Tulsa and lynched and mass murdered and burned a very flourishing Black neighborhood. Black residents, businesses, homes, churches, schools were systematically targeted and destroyed. The city really never found a way forward from this fully until and the downtown core had been really really been devastated by this heritage. In 2018, this program called Tulsa Remote was created by a Tulsa entrepreneur named George Kaufman. Uh, the goal was to revitalize the city center, although not precisely on the sacred historical ground of Greenwood, but nearby here. And here's the program here. If you are willing to move to Tulsa and you have a remote job, you can get paid $10,000 and be part of a program to set you up with an apartment, a remote work location, and a whole set of supports here. You're eligible if you're 18 years old, you have a job in the United States, you have full-time remote employment outside of Oklahoma, and you can promise to work to move to Oklahoma within 12 months. You have to live outside of Oklahoma before you apply. You are rigorously vetted. You have to apply, interview, you have to go through a whole set of, discussions. You're put together with a cohort, there's a program decision, and then you're helped with renting or buying a home, and there's tons of community support. And this has been written up and on pi2burnCenter.org in a conversation with Thomas Teodorovitz. We describe this program in some detail. Here, the mission is to attract and retain remote workers, to make the city diverse and vibrant and resilient, to restore community. The celebrated accomplishment is $563.6 million in direct employment income. George Kaufman, the original founder, is turned over sponsorship to the city, and everybody and his brother seems to want to take credit for Tulsa Remote. It's been phenomenally successful. So some questions you want to ask yourself as you get going are, how do you want to think about what the public good here is? It was defined in Tulsa as community development and new jobs and tax revenue, but I think it's also restoring the community and its sense of identity. You want to think about what are the stories on how different partners contributed. What's the evidence that change can work? How can agencies serve their stakeholders more effectively? Who are the heroes that make change possible here? And that is something we'll talk quite a lot about in this workshop. So 5 steps to get started. Build your team, narrow your focus, bust up some myths, tie your agenda to a redefinition of the public good that's strategically important to your agency, create successes for your problems. We are not yet talking about scaling or opening your door to passionate entrepreneurs that don't know what they're doing. We're not yet talking about how expensive this is or how profitable. Sometimes we're not talking about stuff that's obvious. We're not talking about stuff that's uncontroversial or riskless. We're not talking yet about stability. We're not talking yet about breadth. We're not talking about stuff that's outside your expertise or publicized through the media. No play pumps. Next time, we're going to talk about early wins and the importance of pilot projects. I want to invite you to put your questions into the chat, to sign up with us at pi2burnCenter.org, to listen to our podcast of private innovation in the public interest, to let me know how I can help you. Please share the link to this workshop with your friends. There's still time for them to get a workshop certificate if you attend 4 of the 6 sessions. Come back April 9th at 2 p.m. And back to you, Agueda. How are we doing for some questions?
Thank you so much,